For full disclosure, I got to tell you, I got the idea for this homily from one of my cyberspace friends, Father Manuel Williams. I don't remember what state he hails from, but it's one of the southern states, and he's a large part of this homily today. We've heard it said, and I would imagine that most of us have experienced the saying, life is not fair. We learn this at a very early age. A young sibling gets away with things that older siblings would never dream of doing. Sometimes in a company, someone who's worked for many years gets pushed out by someone 20 years his or her junior. Or tornado rips through a subdivision. Some houses are completely destroyed. Some have no damage at all. Life is not fair. A person eats right, exercises, never smokes, and they get lung cancer. Another person smokes like the chimney and never has a problem. Sometimes the well-to-do win the lottery, and the people who could really use the money don't even match a single number. Indeed, sometimes the good die young, and the villain lives to be 100. Life just isn't fair. Two parents go to the hospital with their kids. Both have cancer, but one lives, the other one dies. Sometimes the upright and the honest lose their jobs and their businesses, while the cheat and the liar seem to prosper. Sometimes hard work doesn't pay off. And there are times when the innocent are convicted and the guilty go free. My friends, we all know that life isn't always fair. But how do we cope with those situations when we find the unfairness of life? Sometimes, especially those of us who call ourselves Christian, try to see the silver lining, to see the good in even the worst kind of situation. We're like the little girl who loves baseball, and one day she's out in her yard practicing. Her dad is watching from the porch. She throws the ball in the air, swings at it, and misses. Strike one, she says, but you're a good hitter. She throws the ball in the air a second time, swings and misses again. Strike two, she says, but you can do this, you're a great hitter. She throws the ball in the air a third time, she swings and she misses again. You're a great hitter, she says, but you're an even better pitcher. Sometimes when life is unfair, we try to see the silver lining in every cloud. Sometimes when life is unfair, we confront it head on. We want to, if we can, reverse the injustice. We take matters as best we can into our own hands. We're like the semi-truck driver who is small in stature. He stops one day to get some lunch. He's at a truck stop eating his meal when 3 burly motorcyclists come in and begin to make fun of him. They mock him, they grab his food, they taunt him for a while. He's outnumbered, so finally he simply gets up, doesn't say a word, pays for his meal, and leaves. One of the guys says to the waitress, "He wasn't much of a man, was he?" "No," the waitress said, "I guess not, but he's not much of a truck driver either. He just ran over 3 motorcycles." Sometimes, my friends, when faced with the unfairness of life, we confront it as best we can head on. And that's exactly what the workers did in the parable of the vineyard we just heard Jesus tell in our gospel. They go to the landowner and they confront him head on. They say to him, "You're not fair. How can you give these people who worked only 1 hour the same pay that you gave us who worked all day?" And I know many of us can agree with them. And I know I'm not speaking only for myself this morning, because every year after this gospel reading, people will come up and they will say to me, "Father, I still don't think that's fair." We can easily, I think, understand their point. We can understand the injustice. We can understand the unfairness of it all. I mean, we live in a world that has specific ideas of what is right and what is wrong, what is fair and what is not fair. And even the Catholic Church has years of social teaching that teaches us the rights of workers and the obligation of management. We can understand when someone who has worked longer than us might get a few extra privileges because of that, but we don't understand when it's the other way around. And we've all experienced being in a store and seeing the owner spend time with someone who's going to spend more money than we might and spending extra time with them? And what priest or minister is there who can't admit that there is a tendency to pay more attention to those people they see every week than to the stranger who calls them for help? The people who worked all day at the vineyard are pretty upset because the master of the vineyard was not fair. My friends, the gospel means good news. So what is the good news found in this parable? The good news, I think, is, at least in part, that we are not the first to experience the unfairness of life. Our scriptures are full of people who knew that life was not always fair, and that unfairness sometimes led them to question whether or not God himself was fair. Just weeks ago, we heard young Jeremiah cry out to God, "You duped me, O Lord, and I let myself be duped." Think of Joseph and his brothers. Did Joseph think it was fair when his brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt? Or Job, when he lost everything, one disaster after another? The prophet Habakkuk cries out to God, "How long, O God, do I cry for help, and you don't even hear me?" What about Sarah and Abraham? You want us to go where? We're going to have what at our age? Our scriptures are full of people who experience the unfairness of life, and many times they came to wonder if that unfairness applied to God as well. And maybe in a sense it is. But there is a big difference between saying life is unfair than saying God is unfair. It is true, God is not fair, but God is better than fair. God is generous beyond measure. God is rich in mercy and grace and compassion. The reality is this: God doesn't owe us anything, and we owe God everything. Our life, our time, our talent, our treasure, the people who love us, and the people that we love. Everything we are and everything we have is a gift from God. Sometimes we think that God is unfair, but Isaiah the prophet tells us in our first reading today that when he quotes God saying, "My ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts." And that is good news. Jesus tells us this parable to tell us not to be upset at God's generosity, at God's goodness, not to begrudge God's mercy. And if we think about it, it makes sense. When I think about the things that someone has done to me that's hurt me, I want a God of justice. I want God to do to them what I think they so richly deserve. But when I do something to others, I'm so happy that we have a God who forgives, a God who is merciful. It is true, life is not fair. It's also true that God is not fair, but it's most true that God is better than fair. Our God is generous, our God is rich in mercy, our God is full of compassion. And I, for one, am grateful, because I would rather have a God who is merciful, I would rather have a God who is forgiving, I would rather have a God who is love than a God who is fair.